Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. Today we'll be starting off with Surah Maida, the fifth surah of the Quran. We have discussed this earlier that with Surah Nisa it forms a pair. Both these surahs are counterparts to one another. In this surah, the final Sharia of the Almighty, which was given in the times of Prophet Muhammad, of course, is something that is presented in the form of a covenant, and believers are told that they have to fulfill and abide by this covenant. And at the same time, the completion of the favor of the revelation of religion, which began many years ago, is also mentioned here. That now, this instance in this surah, this verse occurs in which it's finally brought to completion, and we will encounter this verse which says, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum," which means that today the religion that began its revelation many years ago in the Meccan period has been brought to an end. So we start off with this surah. The words are, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu awfu bil uqud وحلت لكم بهيمة الأنعام إلا ما يتلى عليكم غير محل الصيد وأنتم حرم إن الله يحكم ما يريد. Believers, fulfill all your promises made with your Lord. It is lawful for you to eat the flesh of all beasts which are cattle, except those which are being informed of. But in the state of ihram, do not hunt animals. This is the decree of God. God decrees what He intends. So the very first verse tells us that you have to fulfill the promises that have been made by God. So uqud, referring to those promises which a believer after embracing faith makes with his Lord. And these promises actually imply that the Sharia that has been revealed by the Almighty must be respected and obeyed by Him. And precisely, if we also keep this in mind, that the Sharia is a covenant, it's like a promise which the Almighty has made us enter into with his own self, and we are required and obliged to fulfill this promise. And it is because of this that at times when we break the Sharia, then the punishment of breaking the Sharia at times are very severe and very harsh, because they are not just the punishments of the crime that have been committed, like for example theft, but the real nature of their breach is that we have broken the covenant with God. So there are people who ask that, for example, the punishment of theft is something which is very harsh and which is something which of course cannot be understood, that why should such a harsh measure be taken as the amputation of hands. So we will discuss this as we go along with the surah, that first of all, this amputation of hands is not something that has to be just dismissed or just implemented summarily, and there are conditions to it. And of course a theft which is actually a theft has to be something that makes it culpable. And at the same time, the intensity of this punishment is because of the fact that a person who indulges in such a heinous activity is also guilty of basically breaching the covenant of the Sharia which he has made with God. So this is the covenant that we are talking about, and this is how the surah actually begins. Awfu bil uqud. Fulfill your promises, fulfill your covenants with God. And then the first thing which is mentioned is regarding edibles, and this is of course part of the Sharia. It is lawful for you to eat the flesh of all beasts which are cattle, except those which are being informed of. وَحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ. So the words bahimatul an'am, they have to be a little focused upon. So in the Arabic language, the word an'am is used for goats, sheep, cows, and camels. And when this word is annexed to the word bahima, then the meaning is incorporated into this expression that all animals belonging to the genre of anam, like for example the deer, like wild beasts or wild animals, they will also be included, but obviously only those which are of the nature of anam, or which are of the nature of goats, sheep, cows, and camels. And the word illa ma yutla alaykum ghayra muhallis sayd, actually it tells us that all cattle are allowed to Muslims, or all animals are allowed to Muslims, on the condition that they should not allow hunting animals to themselves while they are in the state of ihram. So in the state of ihram, this is not allowed. This directive, if we recall and also make a comparison, is exactly of the same nature as the one that was given to the Jews about observing the Sabbath. The Sabbath was, of course, we know, was the day on which they were required to just worship the Almighty and not do any worldly chores, and it was something very specific to them. So on a very similar note here, Muslims are being told, the believers are being told that as far as hunting animals is concerned, this should not be done when you are in the state of ihram, غير محل الصيد, which means that it can only be done when the ihram has been taken off. Inna Allah yahkumu ma yurid. God does what He intends. So God decrees what He intends, which means that such directives are given to test and try people. The betterment they hold for human beings is not evident. Hence, until a person firmly believes that God is the absolute sovereign and that no directive of His is without some wisdom and betterment, no one can comply with it with full sincerity. So at times there are these directives whose wisdom, whose hikmah is not fully apparent. And it is here that you have to trust God. Inna Allah yahkumu ma yurid. He does or He decrees what He intends. The exception which is mentioned here, illa ma yutla alaykum, which means except those which you are being informed of. Of course, this is referring to the list which is just about to come up after these initial verses. So the next thing is, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu la tuhillu sha'air Allahi wa la shahr al haram wa la al hadiya wa la al qala'id wa la amin al bayt al haram يبتغون فضلا من ربهم ورضوانا وإذا حللتم فاصطادوا ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم أن صدوكم عن المسجد الحرام أن تعتدوا وتعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. Believers, do not violate the sha'air of God or the sacred months or the animals of Hadi, or specifically those among them whose necks are decked with collars of vow, or those people who have set out for the sacred house to seek God's grace and pleasure. However, once you take off your ihram, you are free to hunt. Some people had stopped you from coming to the sacred house, of course, referring to the Quraysh. So, but before we go on to this verse, a couple of explanations are in order. The first thing is that the word sha'air, of course, is the plural of sha'ira. And the word sha'ira actually refers in religious terminology to be as a symbol, something which symbolizes a greater reality. So primarily they connote certain manifestations which have been fixed by the Almighty and Prophet Muhammad to ingrain the comprehension of certain realities in our minds. For example, when we do Rami in Hajj, so that Rami in itself is nothing. I mean, you're just pelting stones at a column. But in reality, it symbolizes the war with Satan. You're not just doing it for the sake of it. You're doing it to symbolize your war with Satan. So Rami is like a sha'ira. It symbolizes something deep. Similarly, the Hajr Aswad, the black stone. It is when you kiss the black stone, or when you point your fingers or your stick towards it, you are actually renewing your pledge with the Almighty. So all these things, if they are taken per se, they will not be fully understood. These are like symbols, and this symbolism has a very, very deep impact on people. Giving you an even more general example would be, for example, the national anthem of a country or the flag of a country. So the flag, for example, it symbolizes that national unity. In itself, it's just a piece of cloth. But if you look at it in a deeper way, you'll see that it's not just a piece of cloth. It symbolizes that national unity. So it's like this, that there are certain things in religion also that they themselves don't have any importance per se, but they symbolize certain realities. So that is precisely what is meant by Sha'ira, that they are symbols of God, and it is said that one should not in any way violate the Sharia of God. The word Hadi, it refers to sacrificial animals which are taken to the haram to be presented to God. So there was a time when people would take them along, they would walk along, and of course this no longer happens, but this is something that should be revived. So Hadi are basically sacrificial animals, and that is what is important. And at times what happens is that when someone is presenting these before God, then they have to be in all intents and purposes, they have to be fully protected. And these animals, come what may, they have to be protected. And the implied meaning is that these are actually sacred things, sanctities which are ordained by God, and taking the initiative in violating them is a grave sin. In no circumstances should this happen. An attack on the sacred house of God is like is attack on the house of God itself. So that is precisely what is mentioned here, that لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم أن صدوكم عن المسجد الحرام أن تعتدوا, that yes, there was a time when people had made this intent very clear that they'll stop people from coming to the house of God. So that is why it is said, Wala amin al bayt al haram. Those who intend to go to the house of God, if people start to stop them or impede their coming to the house of God, as was the case we know in the times of the Prophet, then this is something that is not on, because these people are just coming to visit the house of God, pay their salutations, pay their respects, and do the tawaf or the and complete the rest of the rituals of either Hajj or Umrah. So there is no need to stop them, because this is no war with them. They are just coming for the sake of God. And similarly, harming animals which are marked for sacrifice to God, and the people who have traveled to seek this bounty, I mean, if you try to harm them, it's like harming God himself or trying to harm God himself. So even the animosity towards the nation should not lead Muslims to violate the limits in this regard. It should remain absolutely clear to them that the Almighty is stern in retribution, and for those who break promises, He is even more stern. So, لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم أن صدوكم said, and if this is something that you are given the power to retaliate, maybe this is something that you will attain one day. So the Quran says that now that you maybe in future have the control of the Baytullah, that you should not do what you were dealt with, the way you were dealt with when you were stopped. So don't stop people from coming to the house of God when you get control of the house of God. And وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. So this actually means that you have to abide by the limits and collaborate with one another regarding what is virtuous. Ta'awanu al bir wa taqwa, and collaborate with one another with what is pious, but not with what is unjust and oppressive. Wala ta'awanu al ithmi wal udwan. So this is a very fundamental verse of the Quran. It tells us how important it is that when we do something regarding goodness, or people are doing something which is in line with piety, in line with virtue, then it is our duty to actually collaborate with them, cooperate with them. So although this has a very specific context here that we should collaborate in activities of virtue and piety, but clearly you can see that this verse also has a very general connotation that whenever we see people doing good things, we must support them, we must raise our voice in their favor, we must try our best to whatever way we can to enhance their endeavor. And conversely, when people are doing something bad, they are doing something evil. So the Quran says, "La ta'awanu alal ithmi wal udwan," which means that you should not collaborate with people regarding what is unjust and what is oppressive. Because wattaqullah innallaha shadidul iqab, that God is someone who is, He is stern in retribution. You must remain fearful to God. He's stern in retribution. If you start cooperating with people regarding what is impious, what is not virtuous, then God is going to really take you to account. حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أحل لغير الله به والمنخنقة والموقوذة والمتردية والنتيحة وما أكل السبع إلا ما زكيتم وما ذبح على النصب وأن تستقسموا بالأزلام ذلكم فسق. So this is something that is once again brought into discussion, that the animals, of course, if you remember earlier on, the dietary Sharia was referred to when it was said that people should not, there are certain animals which are actually absolutely lawful. Bahimatul An'am was the expression used. And as far as this expression is concerned, it is something that has to be at all cost fully understood, that anything which is of the nature of cattle, and also it is of the annexure in the way it has been said here, then only those types of animals are allowed. And except, of course, as we had read earlier on, the words are illa ma yutla alaykum, except what is now being referred to you in the book of God. So now that is something which is being informed here. The actual word, if you can see, is al-mayta. So al-mayta actually means something which is dead. And one of the important ways to understand the Quran is to always have this comprehension that directives which are mentioned in them, the language which is used is always in accordance with the way certain connotations exist in the Arabic language. So every expression or every word has a literal meaning, and every word or expression has a usage of that particular word. So at times the literal meaning is not always implied. In fact, in most cases, it is not the literal meaning. It is the way a word is used that it is important to understand. So the word maita is a very case in point, is an example. So in the Arabic language, for example, dead animal is what, or the meat of a dead animal is what is implied. But if you look at the usage, you will find out that in Arabic, fish which are dead and locusts which are dead are never called as maita. This is a linguistically understood usage of the Arabic language, that dead fish or dead locust are never classified as maita. And hence, when Muslims consume fish without slaughtering them, this is absolutely something which cannot be classified as dead. Because remember, meat of the dead animal is prohibited. But because in usage, the word maita cannot be implied towards dead fish. So therefore, consuming fish which have died their natural death is absolutely fine. Now, this is a very subtle point that as students of the Quran, you must note that literal and meaning of a word and its usage are two different things. The important thing is the usage, not the literal meaning. So literally, a dead fish is maita, and hence it should be forbidden because you cannot eat the meat of a dead animal. But linguistically, in usage, you will never call a fish maita if it has died, because linguistically the Arabs never use it in this way, neither locust nor fish. So hence when it is said hurrimat alaykumul maita, it will never include dead fish or dead locust. Okay, so the next thing which is mentioned here is ad-dam. So if you look at some of the other usages in the Quran, for example, in Surah Anam, I believe the words that have been used are daman masfuhan, which means blood which is poured forth. So when you slaughter an animal, the blood would gush out from the animal, and still some part of it might still stick to their meat. So it is here that it is said that that particular blood which sticks with the meat, if you consume it, of course you will still wash it, but if a little bit of it is consumed, then that should not be a cause of any worry. So the word masfuhan, which means that something which is poured forth, it qualifies blood which is left in the blood vessels of an animal. Which would mean that that blood which is left in the blood vessels of an animal, once it has been slaughtered, it's not going to be any problem if that still remains. And of course, it is later on cooked, and of course, on most occasions, it is also done away with. The next thing which is mentioned here is lahmul khinzir. So lahm, of course, means the flesh, and khinzir refers to the swine. Now, if you look at the usage once again, you'll find out that what has been prohibited by the Quran is basically the swine, because there is this confusion about the swine, whether it's a herbivore or a carnivore. So remember, the Quran has generally prohibited carnivores, meat-eating animals who tear open their flesh either with their teeth or with their claws. And the reason here being that animals which are savage, animals which have this tendency to tear apart their prey and they eat their meat, of course, they have a particular tendency, they have this savagery about them, and we know that whatever a person eats is going to affect his lifestyle, and over a period of time whatever you eat is going to be reflected in your lifestyle. So people who eat carnivorous animals which tear apart their prey, they become more aggressive, they become more and more prone to war and to fights and to things that make them totally become like savage animals themselves that they used to consume. So that is why the Sharia has prohibited savage animals. Now, about the swine or the pig, there was this confusion whether it's a savage animal or should be classified with the herbivores, because it also eats grass. So remember, this is this ambiguity about the swine or the pig, that it's like a quadruped beast of the same genre as a sheep, goat, and cow, because it consumes grass, and it also consumes meat like carnivores. So the question was that whether it should be classified as a carnivore or as a herbivore. So the Sharia gave its verdict and said that it is basically more inclined towards its carnivorous nature. It's more savage as a result. And just as we don't eat lions and vultures and tigers because of their savageness, so on a similar reason or because of similar grounds, a pig also or a swine also is classified amongst them. So the point that is being made here is that the things which are mentioned here about whose prohibition we are just talking about, generally we know from the Quran that the prohibition of animals is something that our own nature tells us. Human nature is something that is absolutely capable of telling what is lawful and not lawful as far as edibles are concerned, because things are, as the Quran has said, it is your own uhilla lakum at-tayyibat, that all things which are pure and wholesome are allowed, which means that khabais are not allowed. So khabais actually means those animals which are not suitable for eating. But it has not given us this list, because in our own selves we know what are conducive to eating and which animals are not conducive to eating. But there could have been some confusion about certain things or certain animals. So the list that we are being presented here is that list in which there could have been that confusion. So the first is maitha. It's been said that whether an animal is alive and dead, there's a marked difference. So if it is a dead animal, you cannot consume it, except if it is fish or locust. And as far as dam is concerned or blood is concerned, you must not consume it, because that again is something that will make you that give you that savage look. However, the blood that gets stuck in the veins of the animal or with the meat, that is an exception, and that is fine. Similarly, the swine should not be consumed, because it is more of a it's more of a carnivorous animal which consumes its prey by tearing it apart, and it has its tendency inclined towards carnivores, and because carnivores are prohibited, so the pig too has the same classification. And the final thing which is said is وَمَا أُحِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ, which means that all those animals on which God's name has not been invoked at the time of slaughter. So the important thing that has to be mentioned here is that the name of God has to be taken, has to be pronounced at the time of slaughter, not while eating, as some people have understood that, well, what the difference does it make if we just pronounce Bismillah, the name of God, at the time of eating, and whatever the meat is, we can consume it. So that is not what God is telling us here. So ihlal in the Arabic language, which is used here, uhilla li ghayrillah, it actually is a term which tells us that the name of the Almighty must be pronounced at the time of slaughter. Why? Because God tells us that you cannot take the life of an animal unless I give you the permission. The life of a human being is absolutely out of question, but even the life of an animal is something that you just cannot take on your own unless you seek that permission. And that permission is given to you when you pronounce Allahu Akbar or Bismillah Allahu Akbar, which is like invoking the Almighty, that God, I am slaughtering this animal in your name, because of the permission that you have given me. So one can well understand that this is a very important requirement, and about animals about whom we are sure that they have not been slaughtered by the name of God being pronounced on them, then we just cannot consume them, because they have been slaughtered unlawfully. They were, I mean, no one had the right to take their life. So today there are many Western countries, except there are, of course, restaurants and cafes which specify that they have halal or zabiha. Other than that, wherever the chains of food go, we know that in most of these chains, the name of God is not taken on the animal which is slaughtered. So that would not be a lawful thing to eat, because, as I said, that the name of God has to be pronounced at the time of slaughter. And if that name is not pronounced, then that you were not authorized to even take the life of that animal. So these are the four things which are mentioned. Now comes a list of the fact that maita, of course, means an animal that has died. But the question that had arisen in the minds of people, as is evident here, is that what if an animal had died accidentally and not died natural death? So the Quran has now given its verdict here and said, and also subsumed under this directive of prohibition is an animal which has been killed by strangling, or by a blow, or by a headlong fall, or by the goring of horns, and that also which has been eaten by a wild animal, unless you are able to slaughter it after finding it alive. So these are once again things that have been specified, that whether an animal has died an accidental death through a headlong fall or the goring of horns, or someone else has killed it, that doesn't make a difference. It still must be classified as maita and hence must not be consumed. And uh, even an animal which has been eaten by a wild animal, and you find it alive and then you slaughter it, then it is okay. But if it dies, then you cannot consume it. And then it is said, وَمَا زُبِحَ عَلَى النُّصُبِ وَأَن تَسْتَقْسِمُوا بِالْأَزْلَامِ. And forbidden also to you are those animals slaughtered at an altar. And forbidden also is the division of meat by arrows of gambling. Now, this is another form of the nature of edibles which has been prohibited. So, animals which are slaughtered on altars, you see, they were very much common in the times of Arabia and even today in Muslim countries, in which animals are slaughtered such that they are dedicated to a certain saint, or maybe the slaughtering itself is done in a mausoleum or in a shrine, and the slaughtered meat is dedicated to the person who's buried there. So the Quran says that too is something that is prohibited, because as it says, zalikum fisk, this is something which is in defiance to the Almighty. This is something that has this filth of belief in it, that you are consuming something that has been dedicated to someone other than God. And the second thing which is mentioned is antastaqsimu bil azlam, that the division of meat by arrows of gambling. So this was a very common thing in the Arabian Peninsula of the time of the Prophet, that people they would often get drunk, and in this state of drunkenness they would slaughter animals, and they would actually gamble on the meat of those animals through various arrows, and whoever would win that meat, he would actually distribute this meat to the poor people. So gambling in those days had also become a means of helping the poor. But the Quran, of course, at other instances has said that ismuhuma akbaru min naf'ihima, that this, although you are using this gambling to benefit other people, that too is something that is not allowed. So it is those arrows which are being referred to here, that you gamble on the meat, and the meat that you win is then distributed amongst the poor people. That also is not allowed. وَأَن تَسْتَقْسِمُوا بِالْأَزْلَامِ. And the reason being, ذَلِكُمْ fisk, that all these things are fisk. All these things are they are prohibited because they are in defiance to God. And this defiance is something that has to be avoided at all costs. So the only way to consume an animal is that you properly slaughter it, which is zibh. And we know that zibh means that you actually slaughter an animal through its jugular vein or the life vein, so that the blood totally runs out of it, and the most of it is of course drained out, and only that blood remains, which is stuck in the blood vessels or with parts of the meat. And that is precisely what the Quran has said. وَمَا أَكَلَ السَّبُوءُ إِلَّا مَا زَكَّيْتُمْ. So this word zakah is basically what is the Islamic methodology of slaughter. It's called taskiyah. So taskiyah here refers to the proper way of zibh, and that is how we have to go by it. And of course, slaughtering an animal, it could be through a shop, it could be through a shop stone also, which can slit open the throat or cut it open. It could be the knife, or it could be any such thing that can sharply cut the animal through its jugular vein. In the case of the camel, we know that the nahar is the right way. Nahar means to pierce the throat of an animal with a sharp-edged weapon. For example, with a spear, you throw that spear in a very particular way. You have to be adept in it, and the blood bursts out from the wound, and the animal dies because of blood loss. So this is something that has to be understood, that as far as these things are concerned, the Quran says that this is fisk. It's a form of defiance, and hence it is not at all allowed that animals which are slaughtered on other stone altars, or divining arrows which are used, for example, to dedicate the meat in gambling to poor people, is also something that is not allowed. So in such cases, it is something that must be done away with. And the other thing which is mentioned is al-yawma ya'isal lazina kafaru min dinikum. But before I explain that, let me just also go back once again to this term al-istiqsam. So al-istiqsam means to look up one's share, or to find out about one's fate and future. So this was like a way of finding out one's future, istiqsam. And azlam actually refers to the arrows of gambling. So astaqsimu wal Islam has been made as one term, and as I just said, that people would gamble on the meat, and these are the arrows that they would gamble on. They would use those arrows, and as a result, they would gamble on the meat of the slaughtered camels or whatever animal they would gamble on, and the meat would be distributed to the poor people. And at times, this would end up in huge fights and brawls also. So therefore, basically, this has also been forbidden. And then it is said, اليوم يئس الذين كفروا من دينكم فلا تخشوهم واخشوني اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا فمن اضطر في مخمصة غير متجانف لإثم فإن الله غفور رحيم, which means that these believers have lost hope in your religion. These believers have lost hope in your, and in fact, the words are al-yawma ya'isal lazina kafaru, which means that these disbelievers have lost hope in your religion this day. So, with regard to their prohibitions, have no fear of them, fear me only. This day I have completed your religion for you and have completed my favor to you and have chosen Islam as your religion. Hence, follow these directives that I have given. So this means that he who is constrained by hunger is compelled to eat any of these things, not intending to commit sin. Then there is no harm in this, because God is forgiving, ever merciful. But in other words, if there is nothing available except these animals which are forbidden, and a person is compelled to eat these forbidden things, then the Quran says that to save your own life, it is something that you can consume. And also, it has to be noted that the word this day, as you can see, has been repeated twice in these verses. It does not refer to a particular day. It actually refers to the time in which the surah was revealed. So, when it is said, Al-Yawma ya'isal lazina kafaru min dinikum, it actually means that these disbelievers have lost hope in you, in your religion, exactly. Meaning that they think that they have lost hope in being able to harm your religion. Now they can do nothing. They have virtually accepted defeat. This is the final frontier. This is the final consequence, that the religion of God has prevailed. So the word day must not be confused with any particular day. It refers to the day on which this surah was. And when it is said that al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, then it means that God has chosen Islam and not Judaism or Christianity as religion, because they are deviations from the religion of God. They are not the religion of God. So these are the true followers of Abraham, or the followers of Prophet Muhammad, because they have once again revived. He has once again revived the religion of Abraham, and therefore he has to be followed in these times. So, فَمَنِ السُّرَّ فِي مَخْمَصَةٍ غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. It actually means that only in compelling circumstances, only when you are in compulsion, when you have to save your life, then these forbidden items can be consumed. The word makhmasa in the Arabic language actually means hunger. Isturra fi makhmasatin would mean that you are so compelled by hunger and nothing else is available but these forbidden animals, that then God says, okay, to save your own life, now you can consume this. But the other condition is غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ, which means that you must not have any fondness in your heart. You should not desire this thing, and nor should you exceed the limits, which means that you eat what is more than required. You should neither have the fondness of your heart in eating these forbidden items, nor should you eat more than what is essentially required. And this word makhmasa actually refers to both these conditions. And so the Quran says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ, that if you benefit from this forbidden fruit because of some compulsion, then you will find that God has actually made this available to you. And the question that has arisen because of the fact that al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, it actually refers to the fact that God has been very gracious and kind, and now the religion that stood revealed or started to be revealed many years ago when the Prophet started his ministry in the city of Mecca, now stands completed. Yawma akmaltu wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati, that now it is this religion which God has chosen, and now you have to follow this religion. So before we go on to the next verses, if you have any questions regarding what we have just discussed and studied, please raise them.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. Just to begin the session, the your sound and the picture is a little discoordinated. It's not in sync, and the slides are also just a little blurry. Just if somebody can fix it, I don't know if that's possible. And Assalamu alaikum everyone to our textual study. We are going to be now taking questions. I see Sadiqa Sadiq, your hand is raised. Please unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, bhai.
Walaikum
It's raining over here, so there was a glitch also from my side, and I missed the part that you were talking about al-yawm the verse about the declaration of the completion of the religion. So my question is, so is it true then that this verse was the last verse revealed? I missed that part when you were speaking.
Yes, I mean, it should not be the case that other verses would have been ruled out. All it means is that the religion, which means the Sharia or the Hikmah part, has been completed. You know, it's not, the Quran has also other types of content in it, for example, historical content, some other references as well. So that does not mean that as far as intents of religion, they stand completed. So there was nothing more of the nature of Sharia that was revealed after this verse. But as I said, because the Quran also has other types of content, like history, for example. So, I mean, yes, some historical anecdote could have been revealed or could have been sent down to the Prophet. But in essential, the contents of religion stood completed with this verse.
Thank you for that, Dr. Saleem. And also, please keep in mind, everyone, that first we will be taking questions regarding the passage we've read today. And then, inshallah, if we have some time left in the end, I'll open the forum for just open questions. Shabana Ansari, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम डॉक्टर साहब इसका मतलब कि फिश में जो सेविज नेचर की फिश हैं जैसे वेल और शार्क तो वो भी हराम ही ठहरेंगी ना
जी वो तमाम जो मछलियां हैं जो अपने जानवर अपने अपने शिकार को वो टेयर अपार्ट करती हैं अपने दांतों से तो वो भी हराम ठहरेंगी और शार्क तो यकीनन उसमें से आती है वेल्स की कई किस्में हैं उसको हमें देख लेना चाहिए लेकिन शार्क्स तो सारी ऐसी की सारी होती हैं तो आप असूल समझ लें कि हर वो जानवर जो पानी के अंदर है जिसके अंदर ये सैवेजनेस पाई जाती है कि वो अपने शिकार को चीर फाड़ करता है उसका गोश्त खाता है गोश्त खाना और चीर फाड़ करना ये है जो किसी चीज को एक जिसके अंदर एक जिसे कहते हैं ना कि सैवेजनेस पैदा करता है और वही चीज जिस सी एनिमल में पाई जाएगी वो ममनू होगा
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Naushad Shafqat, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. Two very short questions. One is whether chopping off, for example, hen's neck with an axe, with separating the head completely, would also that be zabi, or would that be prohibited? And then when you say that al-yawm does not refer to a particular day, here it is with alif lam, as you have always taught us, that it refers to something very particular, like the day. So could you please explain that? Thank you.
So as far as chopping off the head of an animal is concerned, like a hen, or maybe this is done in the case of goats and sheep and cows as well, you see what happens is that it disconnects the connection of the brain with your spine, and the result of that is that the blood does not completely flow out from the vessels, and the animal it drops dead. So of course, people who have come up with this innovation, they thought that they will save the animal from pain, because once you sever the jugular vein, of course, that the animal suffers a little bit because the blood oozes out. So they thought that in order to end the misery, or not even put that animal into misery, they'll just chop off its head, because in that case, the brain and the spinal cord, the connection is severed, and then what happens is that instant death takes place, and but the problem, of course, that remains is that the blood does not come out. So I was just explaining why people came up with this idea. But the thing is that our religion wants us to slaughter an animal in a way that the blood completely oozes out. So if you sever this connection between the brain and the spinal cord, that's not going to take place. The blood is going to get stuck in the veins, and the way it should have poured out would not take place. So therefore, in all fitness of things, you must slaughter an animal in a way that the jugular vein is cut. So now the animal has to, I mean, the blood starts to come out. There's a time in which the animal, of course, is in a state of suffering and until the blood comes out, because that's the only way that the blood can come out. So therefore, it is essential that you slaughter an animal and not in any way use an axe. And there are other methods also, like electronic shocks, etc., through which they just kill the animal, thinking that instead of slaughtering it and putting it into such misery, they might as well end the life of the animal. But they don't realize that this is something that will make the blood still stick in the veins.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Imad Ahmed, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
जी डॉक्टर साहब, जो हंटिंग के केस में खास तौर से अगर बर्ड्स की हंटिंग करते हैं तो उसमें स्लॉटरिंग तो नहीं होती, और वो जैसे ही उनको एरो लगा या शूटिंग की वो उसी वक्त मर जाती हैं, तो उसके केस में क्या हुक्म होगा? दूसरा, कहीं कुरान में जो हंटिंग खास तौर से हंटिंग डॉग्स के जरिए से की जाती है, वो मुझे याद पड़ता है कि कहीं वो उसकी इजाजत है, तो क्या वो उसमें भी यही शर्त है कि आप हंटिंग तो करें लेकिन फिर ज़िबा फौरन कर दें उसको? इसको जरा
तो ये अभी हम आगे आयतें आ रही हैं. These verses are about to come up right after the ones that we have studied. But if you kill an animal with an arrow or any other thing, and that and the way is such that the blood oozes out the way it should ooze out, and you have fired that arrow by saying Bismillah Allahu Akbar, then it is absolutely halal, because now whatever was done with the knife at the time of your proximity with the animal has already happened through that arrow or maybe a bullet or something else. So as long as you say Bismillah Allahu Akbar, that will happen. So as far as hunting animals are concerned, we're just going to discuss them in a while. Verses are coming up.
Naima, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम। मेरा सवाल ये कि जो बेशतर मैंने मुसलमान अपने इर्द गिर्द देखे हैं, वो जबकि सूअर का जो गोश्त है वो कुछ सीवियर कंडीशन के अंदर आपको अलाउड है कि आपकी इस तरह के सर्कमस्टेंसेस हो तो यू कैन ईट दैट, बट लाइक सूअर का गोश्त तो मुसलमान किसी हालत में नहीं खाते, लेकिन शराब को दे प्रेफर के, हालांकि वो प्रैक्टिसिंग मुसलमान होते हैं मगर शराब पी लेते हैं, जिसका किसी भी हालत के अंदर जो है वो जायज नहीं है. सो व्हाट्स द लॉजिक बिहाइंड दैट?
I mean, this is a logic that you have to ask those people. I fail to grasp any logic. I mean, it's totally illogical. How can you consume liquor? Except that there are people who think that liquor is not haram actually, because the reasoning that they put forth is that the word harama has not been used for liquor or alcohol. The word harama or haram as a term has been used for, other edibles, but not for liquor. And little do they realize that the word used for liquor is more stern than haram. So in the Quran, it is said that ritsum min amal shaitan, that this gambling and and drinking is something which is a filthy work of Satan. Ritsum min amal shaitan, and then the words are fahal antum muntahun, that why don't you abstain from it? Should you not abstain from it? So remember that at times people who consume alcohol have this logic behind them that, well, yes, it is a bad thing, but it's not 100% haram. And the logic that they give is that, well, the word haram or haram has not been used, without realizing that a sterner word has been used, in fact, for alcohol. So that's the only explanation that comes to my mind. But other than that, of course, this could be pure cultural thing as well, because you see, there are so many people who don't drink, or who drink because of the tradition that they follow, and they might do all sorts of other good things or bad things, but in a particular sphere they are very strict. So this has got a lot to do with culture. I can narrate to you a very interesting story that was told to me by my friend, that in Pakistan, in KPK, in a movie theater, they were displaying some very pornographic content in the cinema, and suddenly the lights went out, and there was a break. And when people asked them that what happened, he said, well, the time is for prayer. So we have to pray even if we watch this content, then the time is arrived for the prayer. So they just shut down the cinema, whatever they were watching, they stopped that, went, offered the prayer, and came back and resumed. So you see, a lot of things, they happen out of this cultural practice without even realizing what you're doing, and that happens. So it all depends what is the mindset.
Thank you. That was a very interesting interpretation answer.
Naushad Shafkat Saab, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Yes, sir. My question about Al-Yawm, third day.
Oh, yes, I forgot that. So you see, the word Al-Yawm is referring to the fact that this day, I mean, this day is not referring to any particular day. Of course, there is a particular day, but it's not that we can quantify it or qualify it that it was the 1st of Muharram or the 10th of Ramadan. All that it is telling us that this day, this religion has completed its revelation. So the stress is not on as much as on al-yawm as it is on akmaltu, which means that now the religion that began its revelation, let's say 22 years ago, has now reached its culmination. So now, with this surah being revealed, in it you find that the Quran is telling you that that religion stands completed. Now there is nothing more that can be added to the corpus of religion. So the stress is more on the fact that akmaltu lakum, that we have finished it off. Whatever was started 22 years ago has now reached its culmination.
Could it be the day that this ayat was particularly revealed?
So you see, we don't know that whether in all probability, we don't think that it was a singular verse that was revealed. Obviously, there would have been a cluster of verses that would have been revealed. And I mean, even if that is the case, that doesn't make any difference, because you see, it's not that we can specify that day. All that we can say is that this verse, when it was revealed amongst a cluster of other verses, signified that the content of religion stood culminated.
Thank you.
Dr. Saleem, I have a chat question. Can we consume shrimp, lobster, and crabs?
Again, I will say that ask this question, that whether shrimps and lobsters and crabs, do they pounce upon their prey and eat their meat by slaughtering them by their claws or by their teeth? Because there are so many types of shrimps and lobsters and claws, I cannot give a blanket statement. You just need to Google these various types of lobsters and shrimps that come up. There are so many species of them. The only thing is that they should not eat meat, and the way to eat that meat is by cutting open their prey, either through their claws, or through their teeth. So if that is not the case, then it is fine. Just learn the principle.
Oh, yeah. So sorry. I have a question, Doctor. Actually, two short questions, Dr. Saleem. One is that when you go to somebody's house and you know for a fact that the meat there that's being served is not halal, it could be, a Christian friend, a Hindu friend, or even some, sometimes desis also do that. They'll get meat from the grocery store and just serve it. Are you supposed to ask them publicly? Because that even would be a little insulting to them if you ask them at a party, is this halal? Or are you supposed to just, kind of respect the norm of being a guest and, just to eat it? What are you supposed to do?
Well, you should not eat it in any case, whether you're a guest or not. I think there are a couple of situations that are possible. One of them is that whenever they invite Muslims, they normally always know that Muslims have a particular dietary restrictions on them. So they respect you, and they will always tell you that these are the dishes that you can consume. I've seen many such cases. But for example, if there is a situation in which you're not very clear, you have been called to someone's house and you're not absolutely clear, then the best thing is to consume vegetables or fish or salad, and not take something about which there is a chance that it would be slaughtered in the improper way. Because in all probability, Christians, they don't slaughter in the way that is prescribed. But yes, there are many food chains. For example, I can tell you in New Zealand and in Australia, a very large part of the food chains that exist there. In fact, the whole of New Zealand is totally halal. The way they consume the way they slaughter their meat, because a lot of their meat is sent to the Middle East. They export their meat, and so since they have to meet those dietary restrictions of the Middle Eastern countries, so all of New Zealand is totally halal. And in Australia, is almost 90% of all food chains are also halal, because they also export their meat to the Middle Eastern countries. And the ones that are not, they specify. And in the US and in Canada also, we get to know this on food stores. But if you go to parties, I would say that unless the host specifies that this is not, this is not the way, or this is not the zabiya meat, if that is the case, then of course But if that specification does not exist, then I would suggest that you should abstain from eating meat, because of course on most parties you just don't have meat only, but there are other dishes as well. And our faith is more important, and so we have to give this importance to it.
Okay, and then Dr. Saleem, what about the food that's, sometimes people will, go to a mazar and then they'll kind of give out food. That's somebody else's name is also
So
included
that too has to be forbidden. You see, we've just read this in the in the Quran. وَمَا أُهِلَّ بِهِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ, that any animal which is slaughtered in anyone's name other than God is not lawful, because now you have dedicated that meat to someone else. In fact, when we go further in Surah Anam, when we study Surah Anam, which is the next surah, you will find that the Quran says that even animals in which no one's name has been pronounced. So one condition is that you have to positively pronounce the name of God. So that is one thing. And another thing is that you don't pronounce the name of God, but you pronounce the name of some other deity. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that you don't pronounce anything at all. So the Quran has proscribed the last two in all cases, that whether the name of God someone other than God has been pronounced, or whether no name has been pronounced, this type of slaughter is not allowed. The only slaughter that is allowed is the one which is dedicated to God. So eating the meat of such at such places like mausoleums and shrines, even you'll find people dedicating the meat that is slaughtered to saints. That too is something that should be abstained from.
Okay. Akram Bhatti Saab, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum.
Sir, my question is that can we eat meat from a Jewish butcher's place? I was told once by our imam that you can find because there was a question about a couple of shops that we buy the meat from, where they were getting the meat, and I asked imam, he said then best thing is to go to Jewish butcher and buy it from there. So
that is correct. That is absolutely correct, because the Jews, they slaughter an animal in the name of God, and that is why it's called kosher. So wherever you see kosher meat, the sign of kosher meat, you can uninhibitedly consume it, because that is meat which has been slaughtered in the name of God. So that's something that you can do.
Thank you, sir.
Ammar Rasool, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Ji, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, my question was that a lot of the Muslims who say no to eating swine or suwar ka gosht, but also at the same time partake in having a drink of alcohol, when they are asked about this contradiction, and I used to be one of them at one point in time in life, the logic that they put forward is that basically having non-halal meat or swine has something to do with the shirk, or it constitutes a small shirk in some way, because you are either taking somebody else's name other than God, or not taking God's name, and therefore it's a bigger sin. Whereas having alcohol is definitely a sin in itself, but it's not as big as having non-halal meat. Right. How do you see this, sir?
I mean, this is a classification that people have come up on their own. Both are equally heinous. Both are something that they are different categories, but both have been prohibited. So one has been called Ritsum min amal shaitan. I mean, this is something which means that it's a dirty, filthy handiwork of Satan. This is what the words of the Quran are regarding alcohol. I mean, you could not have found any more harsher words than anything prohibited in the Quran. You'll not find more harsher words. So this is like a needless classification that they have made, that when you eat something which is not zabiha, it's like partaking into in polytheism or something like that. Yes, we can say that because you are dedicating something to God, that is something that you at times you enter in the territory of polytheism, but that doesn't make you a polytheist. Remember, it's like doing an act of polytheism, or maybe participating it. It's much like, for example, a person who could be a monotheist and he goes to the shrine of a saint and prostrates there and asks for his mediation. So this is like deviant monotheism, I would say. So I mean, both these sins have their own gravity, and one cannot say regarding the other that which one of them is more severe. Both of them have been severely chastised in the Quran.
Ammar Rasool, do you have another question?
Ji, I'm sorry, I do have another question.
Go ahead.
Okay.
All right. So my question was about this verse in today's lesson, which is, this day we have completed your religion and completed our favor upon you. So my question is twofold. One is that it's such an important verse. It seems like such a big moment when you as you yourself have described it, that it is the culmination of 22 years of Prophet's mission. But the verses before it and the verses after it seem to be all about food. It seems such a bizarre place to be placing such a powerful, important moment in the Prophet's mission. And my second question is, how can we know the Shanin Nazul or the significance of it in that sense, when our Shia brothers say that this verse came after the Ghadir Khum incident, where supposedly Hazrat Ali was ordained as the successor, and they believe that after that this verse was sent down saying that after this announcement we have completed our religion.
So I'll answer your second question first. I mean, you just cannot link a historical event with the Quran. It's just a claim that they make. I mean, if ever it can be of any importance, then they have to show something from the text of the Quran regarding both events. Had the Ghadir Khum incident been mentioned in the Quran, and then of course this verse would have been mentioned, maybe then we could have discussed that. But this is something that does not even come into discussion when something of a historical event which is outside of the Quran is related. And how can we be sure? I mean, and even if we are sure, remember, it's the Quran that is the ultimate thing. It's not through historical incidents that we can come up and give a final verdict. And as far as I would say the majestic nature, as you think, is concerned, of this verse is concerned, remember, this is not something of a very ultimate nature to God Himself, it seems. Otherwise, as you have said, it should have come in a very glorious way or in a very majestic way. To God, is this just a information that He's perhaps divulging to us, that now things are stand in completion, and this is basically making way for the next verses, which say that now you can marry the people of the book, women from the people of the book, because now things have stood completed, and now you can also eat from their meals, because what is halal and what is haram has been delineated. So basically, you have to understand that the things which come in the Quran, they don't come the way we would like them to come. For example, for the first verse of the Quran should be a very glorious event, in the sense that it should be pointed out, and the last verse should also be a very magnificent thing, because it's like the first and the last. But to God, it seems that this is a very ordinary thing, so to speak. Not in the sense that it is ordinary, but in the sense that it is ordinary the way we might look at things. So if you look at the context of this surah, surah is the final surah, which tells us that the Sharia is going to stand complete after this, and now you are bound with God. Awfu bil uqud. The very first verse of the surah is that now you fulfill your covenant with God. Why is that so important? Because it's important because now the covenant regarding which you are held responsible in the form of religion stands completed. So you see, the context has started with the very first verse of the surah, that the religion that is being given to you is in the form of a covenant. You have to fulfill that covenant, and the need of that covenant is that all the things that form institutes of that covenant, they are now being brought to completion, and as a result of that completion, there are certain other things that you have that were made restrictions upon you. For example, there were certain food items about which the Jews and the Christians were told that the last prophet would come and he would loosen these fetters and these yokes on them. He'll lift those yokes. He'll make whatever they have posed themselves as lawful to be lawful, because they were lawful. And similarly, you would be able to marry amongst each other, because you belong to the people of the book. Both of you are. So because of the fact that these directives had to come in sequence, I think that this declaration was made here, and as you can see, that it was made in a rather unceremonious way, what we think. But I think if you look at the way God has presented it, it is as if the Awfu bil Uqud verse, which is the very first verse, is something that entailed that now since we are entering this covenant, therefore we must be told that the contents of that covenant, they stand completed. I think what I'll do now here is that I'll not go any further, and maybe for the next 5 or 10 minutes, if you have any questions, please raise them. We can also take general questions, and we'll end that session, and inshallah we'll complete this next week.
So Shabnam, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you.
ہاں جی تھینک یو سر. میرا پیسج سے ریلیٹڈ ہی ہے سر. آپ نے ڈیٹیل کرتے ہوئے بتایا کہ ہم جو اینیمل کنزیوم کرتے ہیں اس سے تھوڑی سی کوالٹیز وہ ہمیں آ جاتی ہے. تو سر ملٹیپل ٹائمز فیس بک کی کچھ پوسٹ ہیں جیسے میری اس میں آ رہی تھی فیڈ میں کہ مطلب ہم لوگ فارمی مرغیوں کے بہت زیادہ کنزیوم کرتے ہیں تو ہمارے اندر ان جیسی بزدلی اور وہ دبو پن آ گیا ہے. تو سر پھر کیا ہم نہ کنزیوم کریں گے؟ اویلیبل چوائس ہی نہیں ہے.
جی دیکھیں وہ ساری جو چیزیں ہیں نا وہ ہمارے ہیلتھ کے لیے ایڈوائزیبل جیسے بھی ہوں. آپ کی مرضی ہے ڈاکٹر کی ایڈوائس لیں, آپ اپنے تجربے کی روشنی میں یہ کریں, وہ آپ کی چوائس ہے. یہ جو چیزیں بتائی یہاں جا رہی ہیں نا اس کا تعلق مذہبی ایڈوائس سے ہے, جس میں اصل میں یہ بتایا جا رہا ہے کہ اس کی نیچر بہت اسٹرانگ ہے. یعنی جو آپ کھانا کھاتے ہیں, جس کھانے کے نتیجے میں آپ کے اندر ایک حیوانی وجود جو ہے آپ کا اس کو جلا ملتی ہے, تو حیوانیت ایک ایسی چیز ہے کہ جس کو اللہ تعالیٰ چاہتے ہیں کہ وہ ایک درجے میں چیک میں رہے, کیونکہ انسان جب حیوان بن جاتا ہے تو آپ دیکھتے ہیں کہ دنیا میں کتنی بربریت پیدا ہوتی ہے. سو وہاں اللہ میاں نے کیونکہ وہ ایک بڑا مسئلہ بن سکتا تھا تو اللہ تعالیٰ نے وہاں روک لگائی ہے. اس کے علاوہ جتنی بھی چیزیں ہیں وہ انسان کے تجربے پہ چھوڑ دی ہیں. تو مثال کے طور پہ اگر کوئی ایسا کھانا ہے جو انسان کو بزدل بناتا ہے یا کوئی اور ایسا ٹریٹ پیدا کرتا ہے, ایسی کوئی خصوصیت پیدا کرتا ہے جو انسانی لحاظ سے موضوع نہیں ہے, تو وہ ایک میڈیکل ایڈوائس کے طور پہ آپ ایکسیپٹ کریں یا ریجیکٹ کریں, وہ آپ کی.
سر اسی سے ریلیٹڈ چھوٹا سا ایک پارٹ ہے سر. ایک کوئی ہمارے جاننے والے ہیں جنہیں نو ہاؤ ہے یہ ریسٹورینٹس وغیرہ کی اور فاسٹ فوڈ کی سسٹمس کی. تو سر انہوں نے کہا کہ ان میں 90% جو چکن یوز ہوتا ہے وہ حلال نہیں ہوتا, وہ ڈیڈ مرغیاں ہوتی ہیں. تو کیونکہ اس کے بغیر ان کا وہ نہیں چل سکتا, ان کو پروفٹ مارجن بہت تھوڑا رہ جاتا ہے. تو سر کیا پھر ہم ونس ان وائل ہی کبھی کھاتی ہوں, ویسے میں تو بہت ریئرلی, لیکن سر کیا مطلب پھر ہم بالکل
نہیں. اب دیکھیں جب تک آپ کو 100% اس کے بارے میں نہ ہو, دیکھیں بہت ساری افواہیں بھی ہوتی ہیں, لوگ کسی کا کاروبار بند کرانا چاہتے ہیں, وہ طرح کی باتیں کر دیتے ہیں. تو جب تک آپ کے پاس یقینی اطلاع نہ ہو اس طرح کی باتوں پہ نہیں آنا چاہیے. بعض دفعہ یہ صرف کنجیکچر ہوتا ہے, بعض دفعہ یہ افواہ ہوتی ہے جو کسی پہلو سے اڑائی جاتی ہے. آپ کے سامنے کوئی ڈیفینیٹ معلومات اگر آ جائیں تو ٹھیک ہے, ورنہ آپ کو اعتماد کرنا چاہیے ان کی اطلاع پہ, اور اگر وہ اطلاع غلط ہوگی تو اس کے لیے وہ جواب دہ ہیں, آپ نہیں ہیں.
جی سر, تhank you so much, sir.
I have 3 more questions I would like, if everybody can keep their questions short. I want to take everybody in who has raised their hands. Ammar Rasool, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Thank you.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab. Dr. Sahab, my question was regarding this very subject that you were just discussing with the previous lady. That the nature of the animal, if the animal is violent, then that sort of like will transcend into your personality. Is that something that we are assuming based on the directives given to us by the Quran about the halal and the non-halal animals, or is that something that is clearly stated that the Quran believes that this transference of personality does actually happen?
So there is nothing clearly written in the Sharia. This is basically an inference. It is like a derivation that we are trying to understand. Because you see, if you look at our own selves, we don't normally eat the meat of lions. We don't eat the meat of vultures, because these are wild, undomesticated animals, and there is a natural aversion that we find in our own selves regarding these animals. And so it's like collating the data that we have with our practical experience, as well as the fact that the Quran has said bahimatul an'am. So these bahimatul an'am are basically mild animals. So this construction, let me just point this out, that this is verse number 2 that we just studied. So it says that, yes, in fact, this is verse number 1. وَحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ. So Bahimatul An'am is the construction that tells us that animals which have a soft genre, softness in their disposition, that are allowed. So had this not been the case, the Quran would not have pointed this out, this Bahimatul An'am construction. It actually tells us that animals which are conducive to your temperament, which are soft in their own temperament, and they produce that softness in you, is the ones that are allowed. That we make this reverse engineering, so to speak, to come to this conclusion that all those animals which are not Bahimatul An'am, which are rough or which produce that roughness in us are the ones that the Sharia does not want us to eat, and therefore the reason, of course, would be that they produce whatever they are themselves, the traits that they themselves follow, they are over a period of time responsible of producing the same traits in human beings. So I would say this is like an inference from Bahimatul An'am.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Ahmed, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
जी डॉक्टर साहब, मेरा सवाल था ये न्यास के बारे में, जैसे हमारी जो शिया कम्युनिटी है वो न्यास से बुलाते हैं, और
जी।
हम चले जाते हैं क्योंकि फ्रेंड्स हैं, नेबरहुड में हैं। अब उनके यहाँ जो गोश्त है वो तो बिल्कुल हलाल है, ज़बीहा है, लेकिन वो चूंकि उन जो पीछे इसके एम है वो यही है कि इसकी ऑफरिंग्स जो हैं वो ब्लेसिंग सीख करने के लिए होते हैं, उनके अपने इमाम या अहले बैत जिसको वो समझते हैं। तो अब हम वो तमाम फूड खा सकते या गोश्त अवॉइड करें और उनके यहाँ जो वेजिटेरियन जो मेन्यू है उसमें से खा लें, तो उस पे थोड़ा सा गाइड कीजिएगा प्लीज। हाउ शुड वी एक्चुअली बिहेव, व्हाट शुड बी आवर प्रैक्टिस?
जी, आपका जो सवाल है न्याज के बारे में, कुंडे वगैरह ये सारी जो न्याज होती है आमतौर से ये बहुत डूबियस होती हैं, इनके बारे में 100% कहना ज़रा मुश्किल है, लेकिन जितना मैंने इसका मुताला किया है ये इसमें होता है किसी न किसी शख्स की तरफ निस्बत, इमाम हुसैन की तरफ होता है या बाद वक़्त अली की तरफ होता है, बाज़ दफ़ा जो सुन्नी हजरात हैं वो भी किसी न किसी शख्स की तरफ कर देते हैं। तो इसमें बेहतर ये है कि बचा जाए, और अगर वो कोई खाना आपके पास आता है तो उसको आप अवॉइड करें। अगर आपने वहाँ जाना है तो कम से कम फिर आप जो गोश्त वाला हिस्सा है, क्योंकि उसी को डेडिकेट किया जाता है, उससे आप परहेज करें और सब्जी खा लें या सलाद खा लें या कोई और चीज़ खा लें। और अगर ज़ाहिर है कि कोई चीज़ उनके नोटिस में आ जाए तो आप साफ साफ कह सकते हैं जी कि हमें अपने मज़हब के अंदर ये बहुत स्ट्रिक्ट है, और ये बहुत स्ट्रिक्ट चीज़ है। बाज़ दफ़ा भी टेक इट वेरी ईजी कि खाने पीने की कोई भी चीज़ जो कि अल्लाह के अलावा किसी और को डेडिकेट की जाए, ये किसी भी लिहाज से मौजू नहीं है, और इससे हमें हर लिहाज से बचना है। तो इस वजह से अगर किसी वक्त ओपनली भी कहना पड़े, बाज़ दफ़ा आपके दोस्त जो शिया होते हैं नाराज़ भी होने का इम्कान होता है, तो आप उनको बहुत समझा सकते हैं जी कि ये वी आर बाउंड बाय आवर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ रिलीजन, नथिंग हार्ड, नथिंग मतलब अगेंस्ट यू, दिस इज व्हाट वी अंडरस्टैंड। तो लेकिन जहां आपको ये जरूरत ना हो महसूस और आप अवॉइड कर सकते हो, वहां आप टेसिटली अवॉइड कर लें विदाउट गेटिंग इनटू डिस्कशन।
अच्छा, सिद्दीका सादिक साहिबा, if you can unmute your mic and ask, and keep it short please, thank you.
Sure. So, Bhai, I have a question that just entails a couple things in there. There's one thing about having gelatin, particularly in supplements that we take in Canada. What is your call on that? And also, a lot of restaurants and a lot of people here will say you can only eat halal if it's hand zabiha halal. So, if you could just talk about those two, please.
So, first of all, gelatin, I would say, basically it's stomach enzyme. And it's taken from various animals, including the swine and maybe other prohibited animals as well. But my understanding is that it undergoes a significant chemical change when it is cooked. So therefore, gelatin, whether it's used in toothpaste, whether it's used in some defistants, some moderators of the taste, or various other I would say food items, I don't find anything wrong with it, because it has undergone a great chemical change once it is in its finished form. It's no longer in its original state. And what was the other question?
The hand zabiha.
The what? The what zabiha?
They say hand slaughtered, so it's like zabiha, but it's
hand zabiha. So hand zabiha just means that, I mean, what they want to tell you is that it's not machine slaughtered, because you see, in normal cases, the machines, when they slaughter, they don't pronounce Bismillah Allahu Akbar. Although there are other slaughterhouses, abattoirs, in which there's this tape going on in which that recording of Bismillah Allahu Akbar, every time the knife slaughters through the animal's throat, every time that happens, Bismillah Allahu Akbar on a recorded tape is played. And that too is fine, that's acceptable. But I think that in most cases, when this is written on that on the meat or on that packet, it just signifies that it is hand slaughtered as against machine slaughtered. So whether, I mean, that is perfectly okay, because in that case any dubious origin of that meat is done away with, because now you know that it is hand slaughtered, and the person who must have slaughtered by hand must have said Bismillah Allahu Akbar.
But then would the machine slaughtered be any less halal
if no name has been pronounced? Because you see, you don't know. There are, I know, abattoirs and slaughterhouses in various parts of the world in which machine slaughter is done without pronouncing God's name. because some of them think that name is sufficient if it is pronounced at the time of eating that meat. You don't need to have it pronounced at the time of slaughter. And there are other abattoirs and other slaughterhouses in which the name of God is never taken at all, because they think it's needless. So it all depends. But as I can say that when the word handwritten zabiha appears in a label, then there's no question about its unlawfulness. It is totally lawful. In case you find this label machine slaughtered, then I think all that you need to find out from that store or whatever their supply are, that whether this machine slaughtered means that the name of God was pronounced through a recording, or whether that machine slaughter is just a machine slaughter without God's name being pronounced. So that is perhaps what you need to find out. But as I said, that is only the case when you come across that label. So in most cases in Canada, in the US, in Australia, I've seen this written there, and you don't need to do any further investigation.
Thank you for that. Dr. Saleem, just a short last chat question. Some restaurants in Canada play a recording of Allah Akbar while slaughtering. Can we consume that?
Yes, of course. That's what I just said. Some restaurants, they say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. I mean, you see, there are two conditions of halal slaughter. One, that the machine or the hand slaughter, whatever the method employed, must cut through the jugular vein, the life vein of the animal, so that the animal dies of blood loss. That is one condition. And the second condition is that at the time of slaughter, either manually the person present should say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, or a recording of that should be played at that time. So if these two conditions are met, one, that the animal is slaughtered so that it dies of blood loss, and second, the name of God is pronounced at the time of slaughter. If both these conditions are met, then of course it's fine. Yes, there's a third condition as well, but that normally is taken care of, and that is the person who has it slaughtered should be a monotheist. He should be a person who believes in one God, because the Jews and the Christians, they both believe in one God, so that normally does not arise that question. So that third condition is also there, that the person who is responsible for slaughtering or is slaughtering should be a believer in God, believer in one God.
Dr. Saleem, and to everybody else, we'll inshallah continue the rest of the verses in the next session, next Sunday. And thank you so much, everyone. And inshallah, we'll see everybody next week.